Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And Sony finds themselves in a bit of hot water, as we all kind of know by this point. Sony has tried everything in their power to stop the Microsoft Activision Blizzard acquisition from happening. This often has come off as disingenuous at best, but here we are, and Sony is now facing the backlash of their very own arguments. It does appear they flew just a little too close to the sun, as not only did they accomplish their goal in getting the attention of regulators to investigate Microsoft further, but they've also ironically put themselves in the crosshairs of the United States government, as they now want Sony investigated for quote-unquote anti-competitive practices. I mean, here we are, I guess. So we're going to talk about that a little later on today. Also, we did get that Zelda event today where they finally gave us a deeper look into some of its mechanics and also a couple surprises as well. As always, though, we do have a lot to get into. If you find yourself enjoying the video, do hit those buttons below. But I mean, other than that, let's just go and jump right into our first topic of the day, starting off with E3. Just a few weeks back, it appeared E3 was firing on all cylinders, as different third-party publishers was planning to make an appearance, with Ubisoft being one of the key names to make an appearance here. But in a strange turn of events here, Ubisoft has now officially backed off their E3 showcase. This was posted up by VGC, where Ubisoft issued a statement which reads, "While we initially intended to have an official E3 presence, we've made the subsequent decision to move in a different direction and will be holding a Ubisoft Forward Live event on June 12th in Los Angeles. We look forward to sharing more details with our players very soon." So, I mean, this is kind of a strange announcement. I mean, it was just 1 month ago that they announced that they had plans for E3. As they noted, E3 is a special moment for the game industry. But here we are now, and they've seemingly changed their mind. That does beg the question as to why. But I think the announcement is also kind of telling. Even though they canceled their E3 plans, they also announced their own Ubisoft Forward event that will take place in Los Angeles on June 12th. That is in the same location as E3, during the same time as E3. So this kind of tells me that this could be a financial decision, and then basically saying, hey, we don't need to spend the extra money for E3. Let's just go ahead and do our own live stream at a more affordable price and still have a huge audience. That right there, though, that is kind of the issue that E3 finds itself in. These publishers in recent years, they have now figured out that they can still find a large audience without spending that extra money to be at E3 per se. So unfortunately for fans of E3, and I mean, I've been a big supporter of E3 in the past, I mean, it really is that gamer's holiday, but this is yet another domino fallen. At the same time, though, I don't know if this will really change too much for fans. As long as all these publishers hold an event right around that same time frame in June, even if it's not necessarily by name, the spirit of E3 does kind of live on, even if just a little bit different. On a more positive note for E3, though, it does appear Konami might actually have a big presence there. I mean, it really is great seeing Konami kind of return as of recent. That's pretty cool just to see all alone. But this is coming from Andy Robinson, again over on VGC, and during their podcast, he claimed that Konami is looking to reveal both Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake and also a new Castelvania at this year's E3. Now, this right here has been in the rumor mill for quite some time. We've talked about this a few times in the past, and there's still no confirmation for either one of these games just yet, so I'd say just kind of take this news as you will. But at the same time, there does seem to be something brewing in the background. There's been a lot of noise coming from both these franchises in the last few years, especially when it comes to Metal Gear Solid. It actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the lead up to the Silent Hill announcement, which, you know, that was in the rumor mill for such a long time, and some fans, you know, they gave up on it after a while, but it ultimately did turn out to be true. It just took them a while to actually announce it. So hopefully that's the case here as well. But I mean, if this is indeed true, we won't have to wait too long, as E3 should be right around the corner. Oh, and actually, speaking of Ubisoft a moment ago, one game that they could actually show at their upcoming Ubisoft Forward is the Avatar game. This game was originally supposed to release last year alongside the new Avatar movie, which was very, very successful, so that would have been perfect for them. But however, they ended up delaying it into 2023. The thing about this particular game, though, is that we really know next to nothing about it other than it's based on Avatar. So that's probably why there hasn't really been all that much hype for this game up to this point. I mean, it is coming from a hugely popular franchise after all, and there is some potential with a game adaptation and taking advantage of its creative world, But, I mean, the problem here is that we do still need to see gameplay. We don't know much about this game at all. Well, we are still waiting for all of that, but in the meantime, some different images leaked out online that could actually give us some hints as to what all it includes. Now, I'm not going to show those images on my channel for copyright-related reasons. Do check the description below if you're curious. But one thing these images do seem to hint at is that it's primarily set in a first-person view, which, I mean, does make sense because if you go back to the trailer that they showed prior, it is actually set in first person, but still, even then, some fans did seem a little surprised by this. Now, maybe there's a possibility of swapping points of view. I mean, we can't rule that out, but as of this moment, one thing does seem to be clear. At the bare minimum, it does have a first-person view. Let's go and talk about this PlayStation situation, though. I mean, this has been a story and a half. It just keeps continuing. But as we all know, over the last year, Sony has made it their mission to stop the Microsoft Activision Blizzard acquisition. And the way they've done this is by lobbying different regulators. They've just been flying around, playing up to these regulators and putting themselves in this vulnerable position that the buyout is anti-competitive and that they can't compete without Call of Duty. Now, that argument never really made sense for two reasons. One is that Sony has historically been dominant in the game industry, far ahead of Xbox, and then also because Microsoft has made it very evident that Call of Duty will remain multi-platform. They did offer Sony a 10-year contract. But that's kind of the thing here. Sony made it clear they don't want a contract. They just want to block the acquisition. And because of that, they've made some pretty over-the-top arguments to these regulators. At best, I'd say most of their arguments comes off as disingenuous. We've talked a lot about this in the past, so I'm not going to repeat myself there. But this is why we're now seeing regulators back off from protecting Sony as they've gotten more evidence. But it does also appear that at least one of their complaints has actually come back to bite them. And that is because that Sony, the CMA, and the FTC came up with this ludicrous term of quote-unquote high-end console gaming. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous, but under this term, Nintendo is not considered competition for Xbox and PlayStation. Now, the reason Sony needed this term to exist in the first place is because Microsoft claimed Nintendo was proof that you don't need Call of Duty to succeed in the game industry, which was not a good look for Sony's arguments. So that's where Sony and these regulators adopted this new term, quote-unquote high-end console gaming, which only pits Sony versus Xbox. The only problem with this entire argument, though, I mean, besides the point of it really not being true in the first place, is that by this newfound definition, Sony would be considered a monopoly in Japan, which is something that the United States government has now taken notice of. Yeah, so we first talked about this last week as a United States senator brought this topic up in a Japan trade discussion where she pointed out that Sony has a 98% market share for, again, quote-unquote high-end console gaming in Japan, and she accuses Japan of allowing blatant anti-competitive practices because Sony blocks Japanese games from releasing on Xbox. So this kind of got the ball rolling, and now it's going full steam ahead because in a new report, 11 members of the Congress are urging the Biden administration to take action on the PlayStation Xbox console competition in Japan. They've also written a letter to the Commerce Secretary that says, "Today we write to bring to your attention the imbalanced Japanese video game market, which we are concerned may be a result of discriminatory trade practice that could violate the spirit of the United States-Japan Digital Trade Agreement." They then go on to say that the Japanese government's effective policy of non-prosecution when it comes to Sony appears to be a serious barrier to United States exports with real impacts for Microsoft and the many United States game developers and publishers that sell globally but see their earnings in Japan depressed by these practices. So they are being very serious about this. Both Republicans and Democrats sent two separate letters. They want Japan to look into this and fix the problem. They want Japan to basically stop Sony from signing contracts with Japanese publishers where they block their games on Xbox. As an example, take a look at something like Final Fantasy. Sony pays to keep games like Final Fantasy VII off Xbox, which not only hurts them worldwide, but it does actually hurt them majorly in Japan, as Final Fantasy is an incredibly popular franchise there. There's also findings of them paying publishers to not release their games into Xbox Game Pass. These are quote-unquote anti-competitive practices that they want addressed. Now, with all that said though, will anything actually come from this? You're going to hear some different opinions on this. But I think that's actually hard to say right now, as this is an unprecedented situation. I don't recall the time that we've ever really seen the government try to get involved with console gaming. It's crazy that it's actually gotten to this point, but that's where we are. I think if anything, they'll certainly put pressure on him. But as for me, my stance remains the same that it did 6 months ago when this ridiculous term came to be in the first place. Nintendo is absolutely competition. It was absurd when Sony and regulators pushed this term back then, and it's still absurd in this case today. But that's where we are. Sony kind of brought this on themselves, and under this newfound term, if Japan does agree here, then this could be a big hit on PlayStation's business. This is exactly why Sony should have never acted in bad faith. I mean, it was very obvious for a lot of us gamers out there, but we kept saying a lot of the things that Sony is complaining about, they too are guilty of. They sign exclusives all the time. They block games releasing on Xbox, this, that, and the other. And now we're seeing some of the complaints that they made in this Activision Blizzard acquisition come back to bite them, especially now that some pressure is being applied on Japan. I mean, it is what it is by this point, but they've drawn a lot of attention that they didn't intend to. And because of their complaints, now we're just going to have to kind of wait and see if there's any repercussions in their actions going forward. Moving on though, let's just go and talk about Nintendo and Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. They did just drop that 10-minute Zelda event earlier today where they finally went a little bit more in depth into what this game actually is, the different mechanics that it uses, and how it differs from previous Zelda games before it. Unfortunately, they still have not confirmed legitimate dungeons. My hope is kind of diminishing by this point. I'm going to keep crossing my fingers for that, but one thing that I think that we really saw today is the freedom that it gave players and the creativity that it affords them. I mean, if you think about it, that was a staple in Breath of the Wild, and here it feels like they're really utilizing those two aspects and they're taking them just kind of to the next level here. Not only are they giving you this big open world to explore, both on land and in sky. I mean, it definitely seems like a very large game, but now you'll also be able to combine weapons by fusing them, and you'll also be able to create vehicles by using the new Ultra Hand ability and combining different objects. The possibilities with these mechanics are absolutely endless. I think years from now, fans will still be discovering new ways to utilize these features. I mean, we already kind of see that in Breath of the Wild as is, but Tears of the Kingdom, I'd say, is going a step beyond even that. I think fans are going to go absolutely ham on these new mechanics. Now, they did also reveal a new recall ability that allows Link to rewind time for different objects, and also an ability that allows him to jump through ceilings and caves. But all in all, I mean, I think that if you like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom is shaping up to be an even better version than that. At the same time, though, and I hate to even have to bring this up, but it's hard not to talk about the visuals of this game. I mean, watching some of the gameplay today, I was a little distracted by its image quality. Now, to be fair, YouTube does compress videos, so I'm sure that it will look better once we get it in our hands. Pokemon Arceus Legends, that went through a very similar situation where I thought it looked, good when I actually played the game myself, but leading up to its release, there were some questions. But I do kind of feel like watching the gameplay today, it just might be another prime example on why that Switch successor is very much needed by this point. I know some fans like to pick on the Pokemon franchise and everything, but this is Zelda that we're talking about here, and it appears, at least here, it appears to need a more powerful console to truly take advantage of their vision. Nonetheless, though, I mean, I think the gameplay looks absolutely excellent. I think it looks like a ton of fun, and I'm very excited to play it myself. But for all those fans out there that were kind of hoping that it was going to release alongside a new Switch, yeah, I kind of wish that was the case as well. Now, beyond some of its gameplay, though, they did also announce a Zelda-themed Switch OLED that will release on April 28th, and then also a Zelda Switch Pro controller and case that will release alongside the game on May 12th. Pre-orders do go live today, so keep an eye out for those if you're interested. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though, where I asked you all, what new game releasing in April are you most excited about? And as you can see here, 56% of you all, being more than half the votes, voted for Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Then 18% of you all voted for Dead Island 2, the game that just absolutely refused to die. Then 10% of you all voted for Minecraft Legends, 9% for The Last Case of Benedict Fox, and then 7% of you all voted for Other. So yeah, Star Wars Jedi Survivor was the runaway winner here, and I think that there's definitely good reason for that. For one, the Star Wars IP is by far one of the most beloved IP out there, but it's also the sequel to Jedi Fallen Order, which I mean, is debatably the best Star Wars game, or at least from a single-player standpoint of all time. I mean, it's certainly up there in terms of Star Wars games. This is coming from Respawn Entertainment, after all, the same studio that worked on Titanfall. They definitely know how to make good games, and that has certainly shown with Star Wars so far. So, yeah, I mean, when you just kind of put it all together, it's pretty easy to see why there's a lot of excitement for Jedi Survivor. All in all, though, it looks like there's several interesting games releasing in April. While I don't think that it's necessarily as stacked as the previous 3 months, there's still some really interesting games releasing here, and I think it's just going to be another fun month for gamers out there. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.